No sound. All right. Starting this shit again. Okay, there we go. Now I have sound. Ugh, annoying. All right, so getting quite a late start tonight, but it's a short chapter, so it shouldn't be uh, too bad. So we're on chapter 10, Tillman, Land of the Rocket Ships, uh, of this book, Stairway to Heaven. So let's just jump on into it. The epic search of Gilgamesh for immortality has undoubtedly been the fountainhead of the many tales and legends in subsequent millennia of kings and heroes who have likewise gone to find everlasting youth. Somewhere on Earth, mankind's wow, okay, mythified memories held. There was a place where man could join the gods and be spared the indignity of death. Nearly 5,000 years ago, Gilgamesh of Uruk had pleaded with Utu, Shamash, quote, "In my city man dies, oppressed is my heart. Man perishes, heavy is my heart. Man, the tallest, cannot stretch to heaven. O Utu, the land I wish to enter, be thou my ally. In the place where the Shems have been raised up, let me set up my Shem." End quote. The Shem, we have shown, though commonly translated name, that by which one is remembered, was in fact a rocket ship. Enoch vanished upon his name as he was taken heavenward. Name. Haifa. Is that I don't is that half a millennia? I think that's a typo. Half a millennia after Gilgamesh in Egypt, King Teti made an almost identical plea. Quote, "Men fall, they have no name. O God, seize thou King Teti by his arms. Take thou King Teti to the sky, that he die not on earth among men." End quote. The goal of Gilgamesh was Tilman, the land where the rocket ships were raised up. To ask where he To ask where he went to reach Tillman is to ask where Alexander went. Deeming himself a pharaoh and a god's son, it is to ask where on earth was the Duat. Because of all these destinations, we must conclude where one. Because all these destinations we man, I can't read tonight. Because all these destinations we must conclude were one and the same. Ah, I'll get into it. And the land where they hoped to find the stairway to heaven, we shall conclusively show, was the peninsula of Sinai. Accepting the possibility that the details given in the Book of the Dead may indeed refer to actual Egyptian geography, some scholars have suggested that the pharaoh's simulated journey was along the Nile from the shrines in Upper Egypt to those in Lower Egypt. The ancient texts, however, clearly speak of a journey beyond the boundaries of Egypt. The pharaoh's direction is eastward, not northward, and as he crosses the lake of reeds and the desert beyond it, he leaves behind not only Egypt but also Africa, which is made much is made of the perils, real and political, of coming from the domains of Horus into the lands of Seth, to Asia. When the pyramid texts were inscribed by the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, their capital in Egypt was Memphis. The religious center of old was Heliopolis, a short distance to the northeast of Memphis. From these centers, a course eastward in fact led to a chain of lakes full of reeds and rushes. Beyond lay the desert and the mountain pass and the Sinai Peninsula, the area whose skies had served as the final battlefield between Horus and Seth, between Zeus and Typhon. The suggestion that the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife had indeed taken him to the Sinai Peninsula is supported by the fact that Alexander had emulated not only the pharaohs, there was also a deliberate effort to emulate the Israelite exodus from Egypt under the leadership of Moses. As in the biblical tale, the starting point was Egypt. Next came the Red Sea, the watery barrier whose waters parted so that the Israelites could cross upon the dry bed. In the histories of Alexander, the watery barrier was also encountered, and it was persistently called the Red Sea. As in the tale of Exodus, Alexander too attempted to lead his army across the waters on foot. In one version, by building a causeway, in another, quote, Alexander lay it bare by his prayers, end quote. Whether he succeeded or not, depending on the version, enemy soldiers were drowned by the onrushing waters, just as the Egyptians pursuing the Israelites had been drowned. The journeying Israelites encountered and battled an enemy named the Amalekites. In the Christian version of the Alexander histories, the enemy destroyed, quote, by means of collecting the waters of the Red Sea and pouring the waters over them, end quote, were called Amalekites. Once across the waters, the literal translation of the biblical term Yam Suf is sea or lake of reeds. There began a journey in a desert toward a sacred mountain. Significantly, the landmark mountain which Alexander reached was named Mushas, the mountain of Moses, whose Hebrew name was Moshe. It was there that Moses encountered an angel who spoke to him out of a fire, the burning bush. A similar incident is described in the tales of Alexander. The double and triple parallels multiply as we recall the tale in the Quran of Moses and the fish. The location of the waters of life in the Quran tale about Moses was the junction of the two streams, quote unquote. It was where the stream of Osiris divided into two tributaries. That of the pharaohs reached the entrance to the subterranean realm. Oh, that the pharaohs reached. Okay. In the tales of Alexander, it was at the junction of two subterranean streams that the crucial point was reached, where the quote unquote stone of Adam emitted light, where Alexander was advised to by divine beings to turn back. And there was the tradition also recorded in the Muslim Quran, equating Alexander with Moses by calling him, quote, he of the two horns, end quote. Recalling the biblical statement that after Moses had visited with the Lord upon Mount Sinai, his face radiated and emitted horns, literally rays, of light. The arena for the biblical Exodus was the peninsula of Sinai. The conclusion was from all the similarities and footstep following can only be that it was toward the Sinai Peninsula that Alexander, Moses, and the pharaohs set their course as they went east from Egypt. This, we shall show, was also the destination of Gilgamesh. To reach Tilman on his second and decisive journey, Gilgamesh set sail in a ship of Magan, quote unquote, and that's Magan, a ship of Egypt. Starting from Mesopotamia, his only course was to sail down the Persian Gulf, then, rounding the Arabian Peninsula, he would have entered the Red Sea, which the Egyptians called the Sea of Ur. As the name of his ship indicates, he would have sailed up the Red Sea toward Egypt, but his destination was not Egypt, it was Tilman. Was he then intended to land on the western shores of the Red Sea in Nubia, on the eastern shore in Arabia, or straight ahead on the peninsula of Sinai? See map figure 2. Not going back to figure 2, that's the beginning of the book. Fortunately for our investigation, Gilgamesh had met with a misfortune. His ship was sunk by a guarding god soon after he began his voyage. He was not too far gone from Sumer, for Enkidu, whose presence on the ship caused its sinking, pleaded that they make their way back on foot to Uruk. Resolved to reach Tilman, Gilgamesh trekked instead overland to his chosen destination, where his goal were his goal on the shores of the Red Sea, he would have cut across the Arabian Peninsula, but instead he set his course to the northwest. We know that for a fact because having crossed a desert and passed desolate mountains, his first glimpse of civilization was a, quote, a low-lying sea. There was a city nearby and an inn on its outskirts. The quote-unquote ale woman warned him that the sea he saw and wished to cross was the, quote, sea of the waters of death, end quote. Just as the cedars of Lebanon had served as a unique landmark for determining the first destination of Gilgamesh, so does the Sea of the Waters of Death serve as a unique clue to the whereabouts of Gilgamesh on his second journey. Throughout the Near East, in all the lands of the ancient world, there is only one such body of water. It is so called to this very day, the Dead Sea. It is indeed a low-lying sea, being the lowest body of water on the face of Earth, 1,300 feet below sea level. Its waters are so saturated with salts and minerals that it is totally devoid of all marine and plant life. The city that overlooked the Sea of the Waters of Death was surrounded by a wall. Its temple was dedicated to Sin, the moon god. Outside the city there was an inn. The hostess took Gilgamesh in, extending to him hospitality, giving him information. The uncanny similarities to a known biblical tale cannot be missed. When the Israelites' 40 years of wandering in the wilderness had come to an end, it was time to enter Canaan. Coming from the Sinai Peninsula, they circled the Dead Sea on its eastern side until he reached a place where the Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea. When Moses stood upon a hill overlooking the plain, he could see, as Gilgamesh had seen, the shimmering waters of the low-lying sea. In the plain on the other side of the Jordan stood a city, Jericho. It blocked the Israelites' advance into Canaan, and they sent 2 spies to explore its defenses. A woman whose inn was at the city walls extended to them hospitality, giving them information and guidance. The Hebrew name for Jericho is Yeriho, Yeriho. It literally means moon city, the city dedicated to the moon god Sin. It was, we suggest, the very city reached by Gilgamesh 15 centuries before the Exodus. Was Jericho already in existence circa 2900 BC when Gilgamesh was engaged in his searches? Archaeologists are agreed that Jericho has been inhabited since before 7000 BC and served as a flourishing urban center since about 3500 BC. It was certainly there when Gilgamesh arrived. Refreshed and back to strength, Gilgamesh planned his continued journey. Finding himself at the northern end of the Dead Sea, he inquired of the ale woman whether he could sail across its waters rather than circle it overland. Were he to take the overland route, he would have taken the route which the Israelites eventually took, but in reverse, for Gilgamesh wished to go where the Israelites eventually came from. When the boatman Urshanabi finally ferried him over, he stepped ashore, we believe, at the southern end of the Dead Sea, as close to the Sinai Peninsula as the boatman could have taken him. From there, he was to follow a regular way, quote unquote, a route in common use by caravans, quote, toward the great sea which is far away, end quote. Again, the geography is recognizable from biblical terminology, for the Great Sea was the biblical name for the Mediterranean Sea. Journeying in the Negev, the dry southern region of Canaan, Gilgamesh was to go westward for a certain distance, looking for quote unquote 2 stone markers. There, Urshanabi told him he was to make a turn and reach the town named Itla, or I guess Itla. It was located some distance from the Great Sea. Beyond Itla, in the 4th region of the gods, lay the restricted area. Was Itla a city of the gods or a city of men? The events there, described in the fragmented Hittite version of the Gilgamesh epic, indicate that it was a place for both. It was a sanctified city, with various gods coming and going through it or within easy reach of it. But men too could go there. The way to it was indicated by road markers. Gilgamesh not only rested there and changed into fresh clothing, he also obtained there the sheep which he daily offered as sacrifices to the gods. Such a city is known to us from the Old Testament. It was located where the south of Canaan merges into the Sinai Peninsula, a gateway into the peninsula's central plain. Its sanctity was denoted by its name, Kadesh, the sanctified. It was distinguished from a northern namesake, situated significantly on the approaches to Baalbek, by being called Kadesh Barnea, which, stemming from the Sumerian, could have meant Kadesh of the shiny stone pillars. In the age of the patriarchs, it was included in the domain of Abraham, who, quote, journeyed to the Negev and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur, end quote. The city by name and by function is also known to us from the Canaanite tales of gods, men and the craving for immortality. Daniel, we recall, escaped the god El for a rightful heir. I'm sorry, escaped. Where the hell did I get escaped? My eyes sometime. My brain. Daniel, we recall, asked the god El, I don't know, for a rightful heir, so that his son could erect for him a commemorative stela at Kadesh. In another Ugaritic text, we are told that a son of El named Shabani the seventh, the biblical town of Beersheba, the well of the seventh, might have been named after him, was told to, quote, raise a commemorating pillar in the desert of Kadesh, end quote. Indeed, both Charles Virolaud and Bene Dussaud, who in the periodical Syria pioneered the translation and understanding of the Ugaritic texts, concluded that the locale of the many epic tales, quote, was the region between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, end quote, the Sinai Peninsula. The god Baal, who loved to fish in Lake Sumki, went for his hunting to the desert of Alash, quote unquote, an area associated, as in figure 104, with the date palm. 104, I think, should still be coming up. As with Virolaud and Desaud have pointed out, as both though they of them have pointed out, this is a geographical clue connecting the Ugaritic locale with the biblical record of the Exodus. The Israelites, according to Numbers 33, journeyed from Marah, Marah, the place of bitter waters, to Elim, the oasis of date palms, to Alosh, Alosh. More details placing El and the younger gods in the same area as of the Exodus are found in a text entitled by the scholars, quote, the birth of the gracious and beautiful gods. That's gods plural, end quote. Its very opening verses locate the action in the desert of Suffim, Suffim, unmistakably a desert bordering on the Yam Suf, Sea of Reeds, typo, sorry, of the Exodus. And now we have figure 104, which was where Baal, who liked to fish in Lake Sumki, went for his hunting to the desert of Alash, an area associated with the date palm. So here we have Baal hunting. I assume this is a date palm. Okay, and then rereading that last sentence, its very opening verses locate the action in the desert of Suffim, unmistakably a desert bordering on the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds of the Exodus. Quote, I call the gracious and beautiful gods, sons of the prince. I will place them in the city of ascending and going, in the desert of Suffim. End quote. The Canaanite texts provide us with yet another clue. By and large, they refer to the pantheon's head as El, the supreme, the loftiest, a generic title rather than a personal name. But in the above quoted text, El identifies himself as Yerah, Yerah, and his spouse as Nekal. Yerah is the Semitic for moon, the god better known as Sin, and Nikal is a Semitic rendition of Ningal, Nin.gal, the Sumerian name for the spouse of the moon god. Scholars have advanced many theories regarding the origin of the peninsula's name Sinai. For once, the obvious reason that, as the name stated it, belonged to sin, has been among the preferred solutions. We can see in figure 72, way back in the book, we're not going back, that the moon's crescent was the emblem of the deity in whose land the winged gateway was located. We find that the main crossroads in the central Sinai, the well-watered place Nakhl, Nakhl, still bears the name of Sin's spouse. And we can confidently conclude that the land Tilman was the Sinai Peninsula. An examination of the geography, topography, geology, climate, flora, and history of the Sinai Peninsula will affirm our identification and clarify the Sinai's role in the affairs of gods and men. The Mesopotamian text described Tilman as situated at the mouth of the two bodies of water. The Sinai Peninsula, shaped as an inverted triangle, indeed begins where the Red Sea separates into two arms, the Gulf of Suez on the west and the Gulf of Elat, or Gulf of Akkab, on the east. Indeed, when Egyptian depictions of the land of Seth, where the Duat was, are turned around, they show schematically a peninsula with the Sinai's features. Figure 105. Okay, I'll go ahead and show that. Here is figure 105. So we have the map showing the Sinai Peninsula. Okay. I guess. Anyway, we'll get back to it here. The text spoke of mountainous Tilman. The Sinai Peninsula is indeed made up of a high mountainous southern part, a mountainous central plateau, and a northern plain surrounded by mountains, which levels off via sandy hills to the Mediterranean coastline. The coastal strip constituted a land bridge, quote unquote, between Asia and Africa from time immemorial. Egyptian pharaohs used it to invade Canaan and Phoenicia and to challenge the Hittites. Sargon of Akkad claimed that he reached and, quote, washed his weapons, end quote, in the Mediterranean. The sea lands, the lands along the Mediterranean coast, quote, 3 times I circled, Tilman my hand captured, end quote. Sargon II, king of Assyria in the 8th century BC, asserted that he had conquered the area stretched, quote, from Bit Yakin on the shore of the Salt Sea as far as the border of Tilman, end quote. The name Salt Sea has survived to this day as a Hebrew name for the Dead Sea, another confirmation that Tilman lay in proximity to the Dead Sea. Several Assyrian kings mentioned the Brook of Egypt as a geographic landmark on their expeditions to Egypt. Sargon II lists the brook after describing the conquest of Ashdod, Ashdod, the Philistine city on the Mediterranean coast. Esarhaddon, who ruled somewhat later, boasted thus, quote, I trod upon Arza at the brook of Egypt. I put Asuhili, its king, in fetters. Upon Kanaya, king of Tilman, I imposed tribute. End quote. The name Brook of Egypt is identical to the biblical name for the large and extensive Sinai Wadi, a shallow river that runs with water only during the rainy season. now called Wadi el Arish. Ashurbanipal, who followed Esarhaddon on the throne of Assyria, claimed that he, quote, laid his yoke of overlordship from Tyre, which is in the upper sea, Mediterranean, as far as Tilman, which is in the lower sea, the Red Sea, end quote. In all instances, the geography and topography of Tilman fully match the Sinai Peninsula. Except for annual variations, the peninsula's climate in historical times is believed to have been the same as nowadays, an irregular rainy season lasting from October through May. The rest of the year is completely dry. The meager rainfall qualifies the whole of Sinai to be defined as a desert, less than 10 inches of rainfall per annum. Yet the high granite peaks in the south are snowbound in winter, and in the northern coastal strip, the water level is only a few feet below the ground. Typical to most of the peninsula are the wadis. In the south, the waters of the swift and short rainfalls drain off either eastward to the Gulf of Elat or mostly westward into the Gulf of Suez. It is there that most of the picturesque, deep canyon like wadis with flourishing oases are found, but the bulk of the peninsula's rainwater is drained northward into the Mediterranean Sea via the extensive Wadi el Arish and its myriad tributaries that look on a map as the blood vessels of a giant heart. In this part of the Sinai, the depths of the wadis that make up this network may change from a few inches to a few feet, the width from a few feet to a mile and more after a sizable rain. Even in the rainy season, the rainfall pattern is totally erratic. Sudden downpours alternate with long dry spells. An assumption of plentiful water during the season or in the immediate aftermath could thus be very misleading. This must have happened to the Israelites as they left Egypt in mid April and entered the Sinai wilderness a few weeks later. Finding themselves without the expected waters, it required the intervention of the Lord twice to show Moses where to strike the rocks for water. The Bedouin, local nomads, as other seasoned travelers in the Sinai, can duplicate the miracle. If the soil making up the wadi's bed is right, the secret is that in many places the rocky bed lies above a layer of clay soil that captures the water as it quickly seeps through the rocks. With knowledge and luck, a little digging in a completely dry wadi bed uncovers water only a few feet below the surface. Was this nomad art the great miracle performed by the Lord? Recent discoveries in the Sinai throw a new light on the subject. Israeli hydrologists associated with the Weizmann Institute of Science have discovered that, like parts of the Sahara Desert and some deserts in Nubia, there is fossil water, quote unquote, the remains of prehistoric lakes from another geological era deep under the central Sinai. The vast underground reservoir, with enough water, they estimated, to suffice for a population as large as Israel's for almost 100 years, extends for some 6,000 square miles in a wide belt that begins near the Suez Canal and reaches under Israel's arid Negev. Though lying on the average some 3,000 feet below the rocky ground, the water is subartesian and rises by its own pressure to about 1,000 feet below ground. Egyptian experimental drilling for oil in the center of the northern plain at Nakal have struck instead this water reservoir. Other drillings confirmed this incredible fact. Above ground, an arid wilderness; below, within easy reach of modern drilling and pumping equipment, a lake of pure sparkling water. Could the Nephilim, with their space age technology, have missed this knowledge? Was this, rather than a little water in a dry wadi bed, the water that gushed forth after Moses had struck the rock as indicated by the Lord? Take in thy hand. It's not shown as a. Okay. Take in thy hand the staff with which you performed the miracles in Egypt, the Lord told Moses. You will see me standing upon a certain rock. Strike that rock with the staff, quote, and there shall come out of it water, and the people shall drink. End quote. Enough water for a multitude of people and their livestock. So that the greatness of Yahweh be known, Moses was to take with him to the site some witnesses, and the miracle took place, quote, before the eyes of the elders of Israel, end quote. A Sumerian tale concerning Tilman relates an almost identical event. It is a tale of bad times caused by a shortage of water. Crops withered, cattle were not fed, animals went thirsty, and people fell silent. Ninsikila, spouse of Tilman's ruler Enshag, complained to her father Enki, quote, the city which thou hast given, Tilman, the city thou hast given, has not waters of the river. Unbathed is the maiden, no sparkling water is poured in the city. End quote. Studying the problem, Enki concluded that the only solution could be to bring up subterranean waters. The depths must have been greater than what could be attained by digging a usual well, so Enki conceived a plan whereby the layers of rock would be permeated by a missile fired from the skies. Quote, Father Enki answered Ninsikila, his daughter, let divine Utu position himself in the skies. A missile let him tightly affixed to his breast, and from high direct it toward the earth. From the source whence issues earth's waters, let him bring thee sweet water from the earth. End quote. So instructed, Utu/Shamash proceeded to bring up water from the subterranean sources. Quote, Utu, positioning himself in the skies, a missile tightly tied to his breast, from high directed it toward the earth. He let go of his missile from high in the sky. Through the crystal stones he brought up water. From the source whence issues earth's waters, he brought her sweet water from the earth. End quote. Could a missile shot from the skies pierce the earth and cause potable water to come up? Anticipating the incredulity of his readers, the ancient scribe affirmed at the tale's end, quote, verily it was so, end quote. The miracle, the text went on, did work. Tilman became a land, quote, of crop-raising fields and farms which bear grain, end quote. The Tilman city, quote, became port city of the land and the site quote, became port city of the land, the site of quays and mooring piers, end quote. The parallels between Tilman and Sinai are thus doubly affirmed. First, the existence of the subterranean water reservoir below the rocky surface. Secondly, the presence of Utu/Samash, the spaceport's commander, in the proximity. The Sinai Peninsula can also account for all the products for which Tilman was renowned. Tilman was a source of gemstones akin to the bluish lapis lazuli which the Sumerians cherished. It is an established fact that the pharaohs of Egypt obtained the blue-green gemstone turquoise as well as the blue-green mineral malachite from the southwestern parts of the Sinai. The earliest turquoise mining area is now called Wadi Magara, the Wadi of Caves. Their tunnels were cut into the rocky sides of the Wadi's canyon, and miners went in to chisel out the turquoise. Later on, mining also took place at a site now named Sarabit el-Kadim. Egyptian inscriptions dating back to the 3rd dynasty, 2700 to 2600 BC, have been found at Wadi Magara, and it is believed that it was then that the Egyptians began to station garrisons and occupy the mines on a continuing basis. Archaeological discoveries, as well as depictions by the first pharaohs of the defeat and capture of defeated and captured quote-unquote Asiatic nomads, figure 106, convinced scholars that at first the Egyptians only raided mines developed earlier by Semitic tribesmen. Indeed, the Egyptian name for turquoise, Mafkat, after which they called the Sinai the land of Mafkat, stems from the Semitic verb meaning, quote, to mine, to extract by cutting, end quote. These mining areas were in the domain of the goddess Hathor, who was known both as Lady of Sinai and Lady of Mafkat. A great goddess of olden times, one of the early sky gods of the Egyptians, she was nicknamed by them the cow and was depicted with cow's horns, figures 7 and 106. Her name, Hathor, spelled hieroglyphically by drawing a falcon within an enclosure, has been interpreted by scholars to mean house of Horus, Horus having been depicted as a falcon, but it literally meant falcon house, which affirms our conclusions regarding the location and functions of the land of the missiles. Okay. Going back here a little bit, figure 106 has been mentioned twice now, and here it is. So the first was the a a well as depictions of the first pharaohs of defeated, captured Asiatic nomads. I would assume that would be these guys down here and the guy kneeling here. Okay, and then and then of course I'll show you again here. I was just double checking. So Hathor being the cow, I would assume is this is what he's referring to here, is these two upper pieces. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, quote, turquoise was obtained from the Sinai Peninsula before the 4th millennium BC in one of the world's first important hard rock mining operations, end quote. At that time, the Sumerian civilization was only beginning to stir, and the Egyptian one was almost a millennium away. Who then could have organized the mining activities? The Egyptians said it was Thoth, the god of science. In this and in the assignment of the Sinai to Hathor, the Egyptians emulated Sumerian traditions. According to Sumerian texts, the god who organized the mining operations of the Anunnaki was Enki, the god of knowledge, and Tilmun, the texts attest, was allotted in pre-diluvial times to Ninhursag, sister of Enki and Enlil. In her youth, she was a smashing beauty and the chief nurse of the Nephilim. But in her old age, she was nicknamed the cow, and as the goddess of the date palm, was depicted with cow's horns, figure 107. The similarities between her and Hathor and the analogies between their domains are too obvious to require elaboration. Okay, so let's look at um, oh, I just what was her name? Oh, Ninhursag. Also Hathor. Okay, Ninhursag. Sorry. So there is the depiction of her with her horns, or a horned helm, one of the two. The Sinai was also a major source of copper, and the evidence here is that the Egyptians relied mostly on raiding expeditions to obtain it. To do this, they had to penetrate deeper into the peninsula. A pharaoh of the 12th dynasty, the time of Abraham, left us these comments of his deeds. Quote, reaching the boundaries of the foreign lands with his feet, exploring the mysterious valleys, reaching the limits of the unknown. End quote. He boasted that his men lost not a single case of the seized booty. Recent explorations in the Sinai by Israeli scientists found ample evidence showing that, quote, during the times of the early kingdom of Egypt in the 3rd millennium BC, Sinai was densely inhabited by Semitic copper smelting and turquoise mining tribes who resisted the penetration of the pharaonic expeditions into their territory. End quote. He didn't put end quotes there. But then he says that was Benno Rothberg Sinai Explorations 1967 through 1972. Then another quote, quote, we could establish the existence of a fairly large industrial metallurgical enterprise. There are copper mines, miners' camps, and copper smelting installations spread from the western parts of southern Sinai to as far east as Elat at the head of the Gulf of Aqaba. End quote. Elat, known in Old Testament times as Etzion Gaber, was indeed a, quote, Pittsburgh of the ancient world, end quote. Some 20 years ago, Nelson Gluck uncovered at Timnah, just north of Elat, King Solomon's copper mines. The ores were taken to Etzion Gaber, where they were smelted and refined in, quote, one of the largest, if not the largest, of metallurgical centers in existence, end quote. In ancient times, rivers in the desert. I'm assuming that's the name of the book that came from. The archaeological evidence once again ties in with the biblical and Mesopotamian texts. Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, boasted that, quote, upon Kanaya, king of Tilman, I imposed tribute, end quote. The Kenites, Qenites, are mentioned in the Old Testament as inhabitants of the southern Sinai, and their name literally meant smiths or metallurgists. The tribe into which Moses married when he escaped from Egypt into the Sinai was that of the Kenites. R.J. Forbes, in The Evolution of the Smith, pointed out that the biblical term Cain, Q-A-I-N, Smith, stemmed from the Sumerian kin, fashioner. Pharaoh Ramses III, who reigned in the century following the Exodus, recorded his invasion of these coppersmiths' dwellings and the plundering of the metallurgical center of Timnah Elat. Quote, is this a really long quote? Where is the end of it? I guess it is. This whole thing is a quote. I destroyed the people of Seir, of the tribes of the Shusa. I plundered their tents, their people's possessions, their cattle likewise, without number. They were pinioned and brought as captive, as tribute of Egypt. I gave them to the gods as slaves into their temples. I sent forth my men to the ancient country, to the great copper mines, which are in that place. Their galleys carried them. Others on a land journey were upon their asses. It has not been heard before since the reign of the pharaohs began. The mines were found abounding in copper. It was loaded by 10,000s into the galleys. They were sent forward to Egypt and arrived safely. It was carried and made into a heap under the palace balcony, in many bars of copper, 100,000, being of the color of gold of 3 refinings. I allowed all the people to see them like wonders. End quote. It was to spend the rest of his life in the mines of Tilman that the gods had sentenced Enkidu, and so it was that Gilgamesh conceived the plan to charter a, quote, ship of Egypt, end quote, take his comrade along, since the land of mines and the land of missiles were both parts of the same land. Our identification matches the ancient data. Before we continue with our reconstruction of historic and prehistoric events, it is important to buttress our conclusion that Tilman was the Sumerian name for the Sinai Peninsula. This is not what scholars have held until now, and we should analyze their contrary views and show why they have been wrong. A persistent school of thought, one of whose early advocates was P.B. Cornwall on the location of Tilman, identifies Tilman, sometimes transcribed Dilmun, as the island of Bahrain in the Persian Gulf. This view relies most heavily on the inscription by Sargon II of Assyria, wherein he asserts that among the kings paying him tribute was Uperi, king of Dilmun, whose abode is situated like a fish 30 double hours away, in the midst of the sea where the sun rises. This statement is taken to mean that Tilman was an island, and the scholars who hold this view identify the sea where the sun rises as the Persian Gulf. They then end up with Bahrain as the answer. There are several flaws in this interpretation. First, it could well be that only the capital city of Tilman was on an offshore island. The texts leave no doubt that there was a land Tilman and a Tilman city. Secondly, other Assyrian inscriptions which describe cities as being, in the midst of the sea, apply to coastal cities on a bay or a promontory, but not on an island, as for instance Arvad on the Mediterranean coast. There is the sea where the sun rises. Then if the sea where the sun rises indicates a sea east of the Mesopotamia, the Persian Gulf does not qualify since it lies to the south, not to the east of Mesopotamia. Also, Bahrain lies too close to Mesopotamia to account for 30 double hours of sailing. It is situated some 300 miles south of the Mesopotamian Gulf ports. In 60 hours of sailing, even at a leisurely pace, a distance many times greater could be covered. Another major problem arising from a Bahrain-Tilman identification concerns the products for which Tilman was renowned. Even in days of Even in the days of Gilgamesh, not all of the land Tilman was a restricted area. There was a part, as we have seen, where sentenced men toiled in dark and dusty mines, digging out the copper and gemstones for which Tilman was famous. Long associated with Sumer in culture and trade, Tilman supplied it with certain desired species of woods, and its agricultural areas, subject of the above-mentioned tales of Ninsakila's plea for artesian waters, provided the ancient world with highly prized onions and dates. Bahrain had none of these except for some ordinary dates, quote unquote. So, to circumvent the problem, the pro Bahrain school has developed a complex answer. Jeffrey Bibby, or Bybee, I guess, I don't know, looking for Dilman, I guess that's the name of his book, and others of like mind suggest that Bahrain was a transshipment point. The products, they agree, indeed came from some other more distant land, but the ships which carried these goods did not go all the way to Sumer. They stopped and unloaded their goods at Bahrain, where the famous merchants of Sumer picked them up for the final haul into Sumerian ports, so that when the Sumerian scribes wrote down where the goods had come from, so this theory goes, they wrote down Dilmun, meaning Bahrain. But why would ships that have sailed great distances fail to sail the final short distance to the actual destination in Mesopotamia, and instead go to the extra trouble and cost of offloading at Bahrain? Also, this theory stands in direct contradiction to specific statements by rulers of Sumer and Akkad that the ships of Tilman among ships from other lands anchored at their port cities. Ur-Nanshe, a king of Lagash, some 2 centuries after Gilgamesh was king of neighboring Uruk, claimed that, quote, the ships of Tilman brought me wood as tribute, end quote. We recognize the name Tilman in his inscription, figure 108, by the pictograph for missile. Sargon, the first ruler of Akkad, boasted that, quote, at the wharf of Akkad he made more ships from Melua, ships from Magan, and ships from Tilman. Okay, figure 108. It's a small figure here. And he doesn't indicate which one of these little figures is Tillman, but okay, he has it here. Like I said, he doesn't show what inscription here means Tillman. I mean, pictograph for missile, which one is that? I don't know. There's several things I guess could be missile there. Clearly, then, the ships brought the products of Tillman straight to the Mesopotamian ports proper, as logic and economics would dictate. Likewise, the ancient texts speak of direct exports from Mesopotamia to Tillman. One inscription records a shipment of wheat, cheese, and shelled barley from Lagash to Tillman circa 2500 BC. No transshipment at an island is ever mentioned. One of the leading opponents of the Bahrain theory, Samuel N. Kramer, Dilmun, the land of the living, stressed the fact that the Mesopotamian text described it as quote unquote a distant land, reachable not without risk and adventure. These descriptions do not match a close by island, reachable after an easy sailing down the quiet waters of the Persian Gulf. He also attached great importance to the fact that the various Mesopotamian texts placed Tillman near two bodies of water rather than near or in a single sea. The Akkadian texts located Tillman in a Painarati. I can't tell if there are typos here. There's like one, and then the rest could be two. Uh, quote, at the mouth of the two flowing waters, end quote, where two bodies of water begin. When they digitized this, there's got some weirdness going on with some of the text, I think. Guided by yet another statement which said that Tillman was the land, quote, where the sun rises, end quote, Kramer concluded first that Tillman was a land and not an island, and secondly that it must have been located east of Sumer, for it is in the east that the sun rises. Searching in the east for a place where two bodies of water meet, he could come up only with a southeastern point, where the Persian Gulf meets the Indian Ocean. Baluchistan, or somewhere near the Indus River, were his suggestions, but I don't. Baluchistan. Anyway, Kramer's own hesitation stemmed from the well-known fact that numerous Sumerian and Akkadian texts listing countries and peoples do not mention Tillman in association with such eastern lands as Elam or Arata. Instead, they lump together as lands situated next to each other Melua, Nubia, Ethiopia, Magan, Egypt, and Tillman. The proximity between Egypt, Magan, and Tillman is spelled out at the end of the Enki and Ninhursag text, where the appointment of Nintula as Lord of Magan and of Enshag as Lord of Tillman obtains the blessings of the two gods. It is also evident it is also evident from a remarkable text written as an autobiography of Enki, which describes his activities after the deluge, assisting mankind to establish its civilizations. Again, Tillman is listed next to the Magan and Melua. Quote, the lands of Magan and Tillman looked up at me. I, Enki, moored the Tillman boat at the coast, loaded the Magan boat sky high. The joyous boat of Melua transports gold and silver. End quote. In view of this proximity of Tillman to Egypt, what about the statements that Tillman was, quote unquote, where the sun rises, meaning, scholars say, east of Sumer and not west of it, as the Sinai is. The simple answer is that the texts do not make that statement at all. They do not say where the sun rises, they state where Shamash ascends. And that makes all the difference. Tilman was not at all in the east, but it certainly was the place where Utu Shamash, the god whose celestial symbol was the sun, and not the sun itself, ascended skyward in his rocket ships. The words of the Gilgamesh epic are quite clear. Quote, at the mountain of Mashu he arrived, where by day the Shems he watched, as they depart and come in. Rocket men guard its gate. They watch over Shamash as he ascends and descends. End quote. That indeed was the place whereto Ziasudra had been taken. Quote, in the land of the crossing, in mountainous Tilman, the place where Shamash ascends, they caused him to dwell. End quote. And so it was that Gilgamesh denied permission to mount a Shem, and seeking. Oh, sorry, let me reread that. I completely strung all that together, and that's not how it should have been read. And so it was that Gilgamesh denied permission to mount a Shem, and seek therefore only to converse with his ancestor Ziasudra, set his steps to Mount Mashu in Tilman, the Mount of Moses in the Sinai Peninsula. Modern botanists have been amazed by the variety of the peninsula's flora, finding more than 1,000 species of plants, many unique to the Sinai, varying from tall trees to tiny shrubs. Where there is water, as in oases, or below the surface in the coastal sand dunes, or in the beds of the wadis, these trees and shrubs grow with impressive persistence, having adapted themselves to the particular climate and hydrography of the Sinai. The Sinai's northeastern parts could well have been the source of the craved for onions. Our name for the variety with the long green stem, scallion, bears evidence to the port from which this delicacy was shipped to Europe, Ascalon on the Mediterranean coast just north of the Brook of Egypt. One of the trees that adapted itself to the Sinai's unique circumstances is the acacia, which accommodates its high transpiration rate by growing only in the wadi beds, where it exploits the subsurface moisture down to many feet. As a result, the tree can live for almost 10 years without rain. It is a tree whose timber is a prized wood. According to the Old Testament, the Holy Ark and other components of the tabernacle were made of this wood. It could have well served as the prized wood which the kings of Sumer imported for their temples. An ever-present sight in Sinai are the tamarisks, bush-like trees that trace the wadi courses year-round, for their roots reach down to the subsurface moisture and they can grow even where the water is saline and brackish. After especially rainy winters, the tamarisk groves fill up with a sweet, granular white substance which is the excretion of small insects that live on the tamarisks. The Bedouin call it by its biblical name, manna, to this very day. The tree with which Tilman was mostly associated in antiquity, however, was the date palm. It is still the Sinai's most important tree economically. Needing minimal cultivation, it provides the Bedouin with fruit, dates. Its pulp and kernels are fed to camels and goats. The trunk is used for building and as fuel, the branches for roofing, the fibers for rope and weaving. We know from Mesopotamian records that these dates were also exported from Tilman in antiquity. The dates were so large and tasty that recipes for the meals of the gods of Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh, specified that, quote, every day of the year for the 4 daily meals, 108 measures of ordinary dates, and dates of the land Tilman, as also figs and raisins, shall be offered to the deities, end quote. The nearest and most ancient town on the land route from Sinai to Mesopotamia was Jericho. Its biblical epithet was Jericho, the city of dates. The date palm we find has been adopted as a symbol in Near Eastern religions, i.e., in ancient concepts of man and his gods. The biblical psalmists promised that, quote, the righteous like a date palm shall flourish, end quote. The prophet Ezekiel, in his vision of the rebuilt Temple of Jerusalem, saw it decorated with alternating, quote, cherubim and date palms, so that a date palm was between a cherub, and two date palms flank each cherub, end quote. Residing at the time among the exiles whom the Babylonians had forcefully brought over from Judea, Ezekiel was well acquainted with the Mesopotamian depictions of the cherubim and date palm theme. Figure 109, which is right here. So we've got the cherubim and the date palm, I guess. Alongside the winged disk, the emblem of the 12th planet, the symbol most widely depicted by all the ancient nations was the tree of life. Writing in Der Alte Orient, Felix van Luschau has shown back in 1912 that the Greek Ionian column capitals, figure 110a, as well as Egyptian ones, figure 110b, were in fact stylizations of the tree of life in the shape of a date palm, figure 110c, and confirmed the earlier suggestions that the fruit of life of legend and epic tales was some special species of the date fruit. We find the theme of the date palm as the symbol of life carried on even in Muslim Egypt, as in the decorations of Cairo's Grand Mosque, figure 110d. So let's go ahead and look at. So the Greek Ionian column capitals is the first one. Um, Second is Egyptian. Third is fruit of life. Okay. Okay, so yeah. So the tops of columns, all of these are various depictions of the date palm. Okay. Many major studies, such as De Boom, De Leven en Schrift and his, History, his, yeah, I know I butchered that, by Henrik Bergama and the King of and wow, and the King and the Tree of Life in Ancient Near Eastern Religion by uh, George Vindegren showed that the concept of such a tree growing in an abode of the gods has spread from the Near East all over Earth and has become a tenet of all religions everywhere. The source of all these depictions and beliefs were the Sumerian records of the land of the living. Quote, Tillman, where woman says not, I am an old woman, where old man says not, I am an old man. End quote. The Sumerians, masters of word plays, called the land of the missiles Til-Mun, yet the term could also mean land of living, for Til also meant life. The tree of life in Sumerian was Gishtil, but Gish also meant a man-made, a manufactured object, so that Gishtil could also mean the vehicle of life, a rocket ship. In art, too, we find the eagle men sometimes saluting not the date palm, but a rocket. Figure 60, way back in the book. The binding knots tighten further as we find that in Greek religious art, the omphalos was associated with a date palm. An ancient Greek depiction of Delphi shows that the omphalos replica that was erected outside Apollo's temple was set up next to a date palm, figure 111. Since no such trees grow in Greece, it was an artificial tree made, scholars believe, of bronze. The association of the omphalos with the date palm must have been a matter of basic symbolism, for these depictions were repeated also in respect to other Greek oracle centers. So figure 111. Here we go. Figure 111, the temple, Greeks being Greeks, the omphalos, and the date palm. We found earlier that the omphalos served as a link between Greek, Egyptian, Nubian, and Canaanite oracle centers and the Duat. Now we find this stone of splendor linked to the date palm, the tree of the land of living. Indeed, Sumerian texts accompany depictions of the cherubim included the following incantation, quote, "The dark brown tree of Enki I hold in my hand, the tree that tells the count, great heavensward weapon I hold in my hand, the palm tree, great tree of oracles I hold in my hand." End quote. A Mesopotamian depiction shows a god holding up in his hand this palm tree, great tree of oracles. Figure 112. He is granting this fruit of life to a king at the place of the four gods, quote unquote. We have already come upon this place in Egyptian texts and depictions. They were the four gods of the four cardinal points located by the stairway to heaven in the Duat. We have also seen in figure 72 that the Sumerian gateway to heaven was marked by the date palm. Okay, let's see what 112 looks like. Okay, 112. Palm tree, great tree of oracles. Oh, I see. I see what part of it. All right. So we have in this depiction, and here he's holding a date palm, this figure. Okay. And we have no more doubt that the target of the ancient search for immortality was a spaceport somewhere in the Sinai Peninsula. Oh, that's it. That was the end of the chapter. So, all right, cool. Um, I was wanting to raid someone tonight. Um, but I'm not seeing anybody on that I would choose to raid right now. I do see somebody I'm going to stop following. Um, anyway, um, but yeah, nobody I'm gonna raid tonight. I've been looking for Vesper, but he hasn't been on in a couple of weeks. I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, all right. Well, I guess I won't raid tonight, so I will see you all in the next reading. Star Wars is, I don't know what's going on with that. I never can seem to do it during the week. I'm thinking maybe I'll try Saturday mornings because my Saturday mornings are open. So maybe I'll do it then. So I might do that tomorrow morning then. See you then.